This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students and everyone in between, cultural workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Yomaira Figueroa-Vásquez, who teaches in the Department of Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies at Hunter College, where she also serves as the director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. She has published extensively in popular and scholarly venues and is the author of Decolonizing Diasporas, Radical Mappings of Afro-Atlantic Literature from 2020, and of the forthcoming Survival of a People. In this conversation, we discuss the complex geographies of Blackness in the Atlantic world, archival work and its relation to Black study, and the expansive historical, literary, and theoretical horizons of Black studies. Good afternoon, Yomaira. How are you today?
I'm doing well, John. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Been super excited for us to record this conversation. You know, we've been friends quite a while, and so the level of friendship, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. I just think your work is super interesting, both in terms of your writing and your organization work and your archival work and all of these sorts of things. So I personally find it really exciting. It's great to talk to you as a friend, but also I think this is an essential contribution to the podcast. You know, we have a real underrepresentation in the podcast of people concerned with the Caribbean, but also the Hispanophone Caribbean and Atlantic world. And your work, you know, covers so many geographies. And so in terms of the podcast, this is really going to be an invaluable contribution. So I appreciate you making the time and look forward to this.
Thank you, John. You know, I'm such a huge fan of your work, so it's just so lovely to hear you say that, and I'm so happy to be here. I love what you do in all of your public humanities work, in this podcast and the one before. So thank you for having me.
So we'll have a chance to talk about your work and sort of what Black studies means for you, how it operates in your imagination and your work, and how you think about your work in relation to the field. But I wanted to start off really with the more personal question, which is to ask you, you know, what drew you to Black studies? What drew you to the study of Black life? And always for me, the really interesting part that comes along with that, what sustains you in relation to this kind of work?
You know, I think that there's like so many ways to answer that question. I think for those of us who come to Black studies or come to any of these fields of ethnic studies, we come through all of these different pathways because there's not any one direct, clear path to get to them. Mm-hmm. But I think really early on, my love as a child of literature, I used to read a lot. I came from a big reading family. Education was always important in my family. For my father, he was raised in Vega, Puerto Rico in the 1930s, and he studied up to the third grade. And for him, that was really big. And so reading in school was so important to him. And I remember reading all types of literature, but I remember the moment that I began to read the literatures of Black women and Black poets. And I think that was the moment in which the kind of love of literature clicked and linked into a lived experience, right? That I could approach, understand, didn't have to be explained to me, but that there's something in it that tied me so deeply to it. And that literature was mostly African-American literature. I later encountered some novels written by like Latino Caribbean authors, Judith Ortiz Cofer, Julia Alvarez, etc. Those are kind of Piri Tomás, some of those early texts. But dovetailed with that first and striking history of like African-American literature, I think for me, made me see right away that like the way that I had been taught as a child, all the way through high school, literature and my love of literature didn't actually have to come that way. It could have come a different way, and it could have had materials that really touched our lives or broadened our horizons in different ways. And I think that's when I decided as an undergrad at Rutgers University that, okay, no, now I am going to study in that English department. I studied like Black literature, and then I also dovetailed that with Puerto Rican studies because we had the Department of Puerto Rican Studies at Rutgers, and then Women's and Gender Studies, kind of making my own little ethnic studies program in the process, right? And also gesturing towards what would become my study and my understanding of Afro-Latinidad, rooted from my own experience, but also being like pulled from these disparate places, because in the Puerto Rican Studies department, there was very little to no attention about the Blackness of Latinidad, right?
Yeah.
And in my English literature courses, there was no Latinos at all. So if it was going to be the literature of people of color that I was going to study, I had a choice, and that was like African American literature, and I was like, sign me up, right? And then for me, then it really took me to bridge that together. And that kind of changed in graduate school when I went into the comparative ethnic studies department at UC Berkeley, which I think is the oldest PhD program in the nation in ethnic studies. And there, it was really when I was able to begin to articulate the ways that ethnic studies, and in many ways Black studies, because the sister department is Black studies right upstairs from ethnic studies. So we really like kind of and we share courses, right? The students between the departments. For me, that became like a really clear understanding of like Blackness as global and hemispheric, right? Understanding Black studies and ethnic studies, Puerto Rican studies as these insurgent, critical areas, both of study and of community organizing. And for me, that's how the kind of constellations of Black studies came into my life. And that's how I got drawn to it. Because I think the creation of Black arts, broadly speaking, spoke to me as a young person, and I followed that call until I was able to find it and myself, right? And so I think that's how I got drawn to Black studies.
Thank you. First of all, it's so amazing to be able to tell this story about ethnic studies and Black studies being, on the, one floor above, below each other in graduate school as a sort of, like literal architecture, geography of that entire journey, right? Of like moving through African American literature,
and gender studies was upstairs as well. So it was like ethnic studies on the 5th floor, and then the 6th floor was Black studies and gender studies and rhetoric. And so these like the departments all, right together. And then above that, political science, and then below us, sociology. A lot of us who were doing Afro-Latino studies, and we had the working group, and the Afro-Latinx working group at Berkeley. We came from like just crossing each other in the building, in the departments on those floors,
It's funny because I was going to ask you where gender studies was, because that was, as you said, that was the third sort of, as you were piecing together an ethnic studies education at Rutgers. And it turns out it's right there in the same building.
Exactly.
Amazing. And, it's interesting hearing all of these stories across this podcast. I think yours is going to be like podcasts like 260 or something, but just the enormous importance of books in a home.
Yeah.
Right. And the way they end up creating either, or often both, this interruption of a K through 12 education, right? Where it becomes like a place where it's like whatever is alienating at that K through 12, there's these books, this home experience of the reader, but then college and graduate school being this explosion of connections. So, I think my kids sometimes get tired of there being so many books around, but I'm going to point them to this podcast and be like, look at all these accomplished writers and teachers who, lived from those books being around them.
And I didn't grow up with many books in the home, but my elementary school had a library, and every once in a while, every few years, when the Scholastic Book Fair would come, I might be able to get a book or two. But my father read a lot, and so he just was always the newspaper. We had like a handful of tomes of an encyclopedia, and then my mother was very religious, so we read the Bible through and through, and then we'd go to church for like 3-4 days a week, right? And so all of that, like the literacy very early on was so important, but then being shaped by this other world outside, right? Like of violence and racism and sexism and, all types of awful things that one's experiencing coming up in in a city, in poverty, right? Like in working poor communities that are actively, trying to be, pushed out. But I think that the balance of that then kind of, I think, attunes you to justice in a way. So then I
Yeah.
think that when I was reading, then I would read like in, middle school, they like assign me, these, go tell it on the mountain or whatever. I'm like, it's about justice. Like, and I know about that because the landlord in my
Mm.
building, and my papi's the super and he doesn't treat him right. Like, and so I'm like, I'm trying, making those connections as a young person. So I love that. But anyway, to that end, I was gonna say I love that about the all the books in your house and your kids. My kid just told me about 2 weeks ago. He just turned 4, so about a few weeks before that, he turns around, he looks in his room at his like little books, and he goes, "This is my library." And I was like, "Yeah, this is your
We love
library."
to
He's
hear
like,
this.
"Maceo's library," So it's like really. He's just like, "Oh, I have a library," and I was like, "Oh, yes, yes, you do." So very sweet.
It'd just be nice to be able to like have like, that as the end of parenting in the sense of like, let's go out on this note of like bragging
Yeah.
about his own library. I love it. Yeah. And also it's, what you said, I kind of misstated it, but that, because what I meant to say, the books in the home, I meant to say this like love of reading in the home and like
Yeah,
the way
yeah,
that expands your world and
yeah.
allows that sense of discovery. And, you know, I won't say that my kids necessarily have a love of reading, but they know that it's at least a value that they're supposed to have.
Yeah.
Maybe it functions as a super ego at school and the rest of
Right,
their life or
right.
something. So,
Yeah, for sure. They're like, "Okay, I know this. Like, no one I understand. Yes. Let me carry
uh,
this book."
yes, let me pretend to have a book collection.
Yeah, so good.
It's like, you better have one when I come visit your apartment, Miles, if you're listening to
Imagine
this.
they're like pulling like a suitcase out, like, "Put these books out before my parents come here." They lose it. Lose it if I don't have some books out. Yeah.
Exactly. They ain't gonna inherit money, but they're gonna get a lot of books.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you about Black studies, and how you imagine the field. And I want to ask this, sort of what that portrait is that you work with, that that guides your work or guides your sort of intellectual imagination, and ask it from the context of its founding, which is the tension between the commitment in Black studies to an intellectual tradition that really comes from that student demand that campuses have a place where the study of Black life, the study of Black intellectual tradition, expressive traditions, and so forth, the disciplines had failed that, and Black studies was going to be that place and has been that place. That was a student demand, a commitment to intellectual life. It's something I think
Mhm.
we inherit in our idea of Black studies today. But of course, also in the late 1960s and early 1970s, this is a moment of the radicalization of Black liberation struggle, where some of those boundaries, if not all those boundaries, between something like a classroom and a community, between a book and mobilization, between ideas and activism, were really blurred and deeply contested. And I think we inherit that in terms of Black studies' commitment to a certain kind of liberatory politics. And I think that commitment to an intellectual tradition and to a particular liberatory politics is a sort of tension that orients the field and is at the heart of the field. And sort of in that context, I'm sort of asking it in that context, I'm curious what that portrait of Black studies is for you that guides your work.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for laying that out so beautifully. I think so many more people should know the the origins and the histories of this field and be able to articulate it in the very beautiful way that you just did, because it was this incredible heretical moment in the academy and in knowledge production writ large, right? It should be marked as such. And what's really beautiful about the question that you just posed is that it dovetails so beautifully with the history of Puerto Rican studies, which comes into birth at the very same time. And so on both sides of my work, thinking about Black studies, and my Black studies is Puerto Rican studies, my Puerto Rican studies is Black studies, for folks who are not there with me in that point, um, what is so important to me about the ways that these fields of knowledge and practice come to be, is that they come from within the people themselves, right? And they come not just only as a response to like a super Eurocentric and white supremacist and, heteropatriarchal and exclusive university system, right? Like as it was designed in, the 18th century or whatever, right? But that they were also coming not it as it like in a sense of a cultivation of their own, that it was not only in response to that knowledge. Like, we actually have something of our own to share, and a knowledge that should be cared for and propagated, right, in all of these ways. So for me, I really love that moment of that insurgency, because it speaks to the two sides of the battle, and oftentimes the kind of binary that we find ourselves in when it comes to the kind of revolutionary Black studies and the kind of like, and I say that in quotes, right? The revolutionary Black studies, and then the kind of more elitist Black studies, or perhaps the more genteel Black studies that might exist in some universities, or however people like to posit the academic versus the activist. However they want to make those distinctions. And we've heard that tried and true, argument all over the place. We still hear it now. So there's so much, I think, tension in that. But I think that one of the things that I like to remember about this history is that the folks who were advocating for Black studies, Puerto Rican studies, Asian American studies, Native American studies, particularly in that historic moment, particularly like both, here on the East Coast, but especially on the West Coast, they were demanding not just fields of study. They were demanding for a third world college. They were the Third World Liberation Front, right? It wasn't a project about inclusion to the university. It was a project that wanted to build something in the wake of the university, right? They wanted to build something aside. They said, we need an entire university, an entire college that deals with this, not just one field, right? Not one department, not one floor, right? To talk about these things. The concession was then, Black studies, Asian American studies, Chicano studies, Puerto Rican studies, Native American studies, right? The studies are born. But that wasn't the demand, right? That wasn't what they were asking, right? And so because of that, like that historic demand, and even like the historic outcome, right? Like, even though it wasn't what they wanted, they negotiated for X, and we got Y, right? Because of that, I don't think that the call for Black studies, the call for ethnic studies, that the students, that the community, that professors, that activists wanted, that initial call wasn't responded to in that way, right? And so if we imagine that the departments are going to fulfill that dream, the dream for an entire college, an entire university system that would be completely different and attend to this, well, of course, you're going to see the tension, and you're going to see the failure or the exclusion or the whatever of Black studies. You'll see the bad actors of Black studies, right? But then when you see that, they asked for a mile and they got an inch, right? Or they got a half a mile, right? Now, what do we have to do to build the rest of the road to that direction?
Yeah.
Like, what do we have to do to get it the rest of the way? Or is there a different direction that we want to go in, right? Maybe that's not the ends. So I think, like, in the larger, like, philosophical way, I'll say that. I have much more very specific things that I could say about this. But, like, in the meta way, when I think about Black studies, when I think about Puerto Rican studies, and the way that I'm coming through Puerto Rican studies as a Black woman, right, and a Black woman director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, which is the largest center globally that's focusing on Puerto Rico and its diaspora, representing 9 million people, right? I think about, what does it mean for me to conceive of the initial call for this field? How are we attending to it? What are the ways that we can push it forward? What are the concessions that we have made and continue to make, right? And then how do we reopen paths within enclosures? Because we got caught into enclosure, right? Like, the university is an enclosure. So we're just like, oh, okay. So how do we dig paths out of here with and to community? How do we break this apart? How do we kind of revive the idea of the radical potential of Black studies? And I think we still have that in many places, in many areas, in many pockets of Black studies. And so that's why I think this podcast is so cool and important, because I'm interested about the past of Black studies and its future, and what we're doing right now. And if we're working towards the same ends, towards the same goals. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this how do we build that half mile or, whatever the measurement is, that remaining demand. And I do like to every once in a while, whenever possible, to tag previous episodes. Corey Walker's episode talked pretty extensively about this idea of the Black university, right, as a demand of Black studies and sort of thinking about what that means. And so I like this. It really pairs very well with some of the elements of his podcast episode, and as a reminder, as you said, like a reminder of this original demand and what does it mean for us to ask ourselves to respond to it. And I think, I'm hearing you talk about this, I'm very moved by it. And I've been asking myself this for a while, like, how to do this kind of work. I mean, I'm a full professor, like, this actually work that I should be a part of organizing, this part of my career. And that's a hard question, but it's also such an important question at a moment where Black studies is in crisis, because crisis can really be often about holding on to what we have and protecting as much of what we have. But I think part of what you're talking about is this moment where it's like, maybe we should see this as an expansive moment in another kind of direction rather than simply holding on to what we have inside the enclosure. But just say, we can also think outside the enclosure, because the enclosure is not actually contingent. Outside the enclosure is not contingent on those things inside in that same way.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just thinking with what you're saying because it's been on my mind a lot.
No, absolutely. I mean, I have this research center that's not a department, but we have a department of Africana, Puerto Rican, Latino studies at my university, right? So, so we have that department, then we have the center itself that does all of this research, that was founded in 1973 on the same principles, right, of the creation of ethnic studies, Black studies, right, and Puerto Rican studies, and in fact was created as an institution that would help support the burgeoning departments of Puerto Rican studies that were cropping up around the country.
Mm-hmm.
So we were supposed to be the center anchor for those departments and programs, right, by bringing together task force. We had a prison task force. We had like a social welfare task force, and arts and culture. Like, this is 70s, right? And it's an all working consensus, an all working working group, and they're all doing this incredible work. And I'm going through our archive looking at, well, what was it that they wanted to do? What was Centro supposed to be? I know what it became, I know what we're doing now. Does it have anything to do with what we did before? Right? Mm-hmm. And let me just double check, let me double check. And then also over time, you get a little bit stiffer, a little bit more enclosed, right? You can't do this. You might not be able to do that. And so now I think the questions for me are like, oh, well, why can't we partner with these people? Why wouldn't I be able to invite that person? Who says that XYZ can't be a researcher in residence, right? If they don't have a PhD. So now we're really questioning, right? And going back to those principles, which is like, we want actionable and accessible research in Puerto Rican studies. And I could think about that and transpose that. We want actionable and accessible research in Black studies. That's what we want. We want that the knowledge comes to us, that we can use it, that we can understand it, right? For me, that is so clear, it's so simple, it's so beautiful. And we have so much potential inside and outside of the enclosure of the university to be able to do that, right? And I think about our role as professors and scholars, and I've been on one about this, about I've been questioning, is this job a vocation? Is it something that you apprentice into? What does it mean to be an intellectual? What does it mean to be a public intellectual? What does it mean to be a professor, to have had the privilege and opportunity to sit and read and read and read and read and study and write for years, to hold all of this information in your mind, to be able to contextualize and talk to people about varying topics in history, to be able to orient people very quickly on pressing matters, right? And I think about this in relation a lot to my family because I'm a first generation high school and college graduate. So just the other day, I was explaining to my mother, about the midterm elections and how, how the three houses work, right? And, the structure of the government. She had and I was like, oh, let me explain to you, right? And I'm like, oh, well, our work is supposed to, our knowledge that we accumulate is supposed to be able to help people understand things. Are we doing that? And when you are doing work in ethnic studies and Black studies, that's your mission triple time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the
Yeah.
reason for the season. That is the reason that we're doing it. So are we doing that, or are we kind of getting trapped oftentimes against our will with the demands of the university and the professoriate, and then the whims of a political system that would like to, create straw men and enemies out of, intellectuals and artists, and wants to start cutting budgets, and then spineless administration just fold. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it, and then are we quick? Anyway, so I could just go down this well forever, but it just makes me like the more intense the political atmosphere gets, the kind of clearer and clearer it becomes to me what our job is supposed to be and how quickly we need to like be on our toes about doing it in in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in discreet and in indiscreet ways, right? And to
Mm-hmm.
think about it as, hey, my purpose is to do this, so let me do this in whatever capacity I can. I think.
I love that. It's that what you just said is such an important contribution to the series all by itself. I like the phrase, "the reason for the season." Like, it's like what is the Jesus of Black Studies? It's the birth, right? It's the birth of Black Studies. It's going back to that origin might actually be, and the failures at that origin might actually be some of the saving power for us. So.
Mm.
I'm going to play with this reason for the season moment. This is something really deep here. So, well, let me ask you about your work. In particular, your work has this interesting mix of transatlantic interests. Your book is so fantastic, by the way. Everybody should read it. It'll be be a link to it. Interested in cultural studies really broadly, aesthetics, and of course, in your current job, also a lot of archive building and sustaining. And this is just such a rich mixture of interests for the field of Black studies. I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit how you think your orientation as a scholar and worker connects to the past of Black studies, but also what boundaries and horizons you think it pushes and opens up.
Okay. I always like to say, like, I'm a hood rat at heart. So when I went to grad school at the tender age of 23, I had
By the way, isn't it crazy that 23-year-olds go to graduate school now that we're not 23?
bananas, bananas. I'm like, baby, no, baby, go dancing, baby. No, no, no. Shh, 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 shh. Don't worry
Don't
about
fall
it.
for it.
Yeah, I'm like, swing low, sweet chariot, babe. No, 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 no. Yeah, it's it's bananas. Anyway, so I go to grad school and I'm ignorant. I'm just an ignorant, like, I just say so many awful things in that context because I go there from a lived experience of being a Black Puerto Rican girl, from the East Coast, from, a particular background. And when I went to California to this ethnic studies program, I was like, who can top that shit? Right? Puerto Ricans, I guarantee you, are the most oppressed people on planet Earth. Like, I was that person, Um, and my cohort, it was 10 of us, and it was oh so beautiful and so humbling, our first meeting, and those first few weeks of graduate school to kind of think about other places and other people in this larger relational context. So that's like square one for me. So I come in saying like, it's Puerto Rico this, Puerto Rico that, bop, bop, bop. And then they're like, did you know about, the history of Chamorros in Guam? Did you know about, the Ojibwe, Minnesota? Did you know about, the fall of Saigon and the, the French Viet children and the boat people? Did you know about the, right? Like the Korean Canadians? Did you
Mm-hmm.
know about the intimate encounters between, Asian Canadians and First Nations peoples in the Pacific Northwest? Did you know? And it was like, no, 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 I didn't know any of this. I knew nothing. I am so sorry. Let me take every seat in this seminar room and in every seminar room and learn as much as I can. And in that process, not only was a particular kind of like ethics built, like an
Mm-hmm.
intellectual ethics and an
Yeah.
ethics of like solidarity, and relationality, right? But also I started to encounter different kinds of texts and different ways of seeing things. I had already been reading African literature on my own. So, when you talked about the past of Black studies, I was thinking about this moment where I'm taken up by African literature, like towards like the end of my undergraduate, early graduate career, and I'm in a seminar with Percy Hinson about African and Caribbean literature. There's a student who's there, Natasha Himmelman, who came from Cape Town, South Africa. She's Puerto Rican in Cape Town doing her PhD. She's here at Berkeley for like this second. So we're like talking and she's like, hey, you are doing this whole thing on, Achebe and Emmanuel Eze's on Reason and these other, you're doing Ngugi and all these other stuff. Have you heard of, Donata Ndongo and Bidyogo? And I was like, no. She's like, oh, this is the literature from Equatorial Guinea. It's the only Spanish-speaking country in sub-Saharan Africa. And I was like, I've never heard of it and I've never heard of that literature. And so she was like, I have a few novels with me. Let me lend you some. Lent me some. Changed everything, right? Because then when you're already primed for relationality, right? And I was primed to think about that in this kind of broad hemispheric context, like in the kind of like North America, Americas, Latin America, right? Like in Caribbean context. But then that moment of saying like, here's this literature, and I could see clearly from reading it in its original Spanish, because it hadn't been translated, the majority of the literature is not translated to English, reading it in Spanish, how it spoke so much to Achebe, Senghor, and Memi, and like it is so much part of the African literary tradition, right? That anti-colonial tradition, and yet it is not part of the African literary tradition, the canon, right? Because it is in Spanish, and because it is in Spanish, it's completely outside of the world of letters there, right? It's also not part of the world of letters in Spain because it's made by former colonial subjects, right? Even as much of it is written in Spain. So we also have anti-Blackness. Obviously, that's the main crux here of the problem. And so you have this like beautiful literary production that is being produced of a nation that's, like the connection between, this not only the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, but the Americas and Equatorial Guinea, and the ways that the literature speak to each other, the experiences under colonialism, dictatorship, experiences of like exile, of diaspora, experiences of like intimate violence, right? Like of patriarchy, questions about what could reparations look like, questions about what the future is for people who live on islands in the Atlantic. Like all of those things are connecting them, and that literature is being produced in almost total darkness, right? Because they live under the severe repressive dictatorship, right? And it is, for me, one of the kind of most important kind of link. And I think this is where the early ethnic studies training really was so important to me, was that instead of me trying to make this kind of intellectual project a contention between the publishing industry or Spain or like, whatever, like, and this is why, I thought like, oh my God, like that's a distraction. This is a distraction, right? Like to just always and only attend to the racism is such a distraction to what is happening, because this is so rich in the way that it's telling history, in particular because history in this place is outlawed to write, right? Like, so the literature acts as history itself. If it were to be in contact with other Black people, with other experiences in relation, how do they illuminate each other? How do we understand each other, right? And I think that is also part of the ethnic studies kind of practice, which is, yes, we can always do an ethnic studies that's in relation to structures of oppression, right? And to white supremacy in all of its iterations. But we can also see, well, what are the points of connection, of solidarity, of violence between our groups, right? Between us. What happens in the midst of the people, right? To kind of take that decolonial feminist philosophical point of view, right? When you don't take the bird's eye view, when people are together, what do they learn from each other? And I think for me, thinking about that and then thinking about the way that Black women, and in particular Black Caribbean women, have provided such a beautiful roadmap to thinking about relationality within Blackness, right? I think about M. Jackie Alexander's contention, like, one is not born a woman of color, one becomes a woman of color, because you put your like political, psychological, emotional attention onto the histories of someone else, right? To understand each other, to replace the lies that you've been told with truths that you tell each other, right? And so for me, like when I think about that kind of transatlantic project, that both transatlantic and hemispheric project that I did very early on, it came from those like early pushes for me to think much more complexly and much more generously and much more ethically at the question of Black life, right? If my question about Black life was only centered on Puerto Rico, perhaps that is enough. But what actually opened my world and opened, the possibilities of my thinking and teaching were bringing those Black Puerto Rican experiences in relation to our closest neighbors and to our very distant kin for whom, much is owed, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. That's, I mean, as an origin story of ideas and connections, it's really compelling. Again, I always love these sort of chance moments where somebody's like, "Hey, I have these novels. You should check them out."
Yeah,
And you read them, and
yeah.
also obviously, I mean, you said it, but it's also like such a thread throughout there is just the way the question of language opens up this new horizon. I mean, it's a thing I talk about all the time, so I know I'm a little obnoxious about it to a lot of people, but Black Studies needs to start insisting on multiple languages because, what you demonstrate there in what you just said is how language, just the fact of language facility allows you to decolonize diaspora. I mean, somebody should write a book with this as a title.
They should.
I don't know if anybody has, maybe another Yomaira.
Yeah.
But yeah, decolonizing diasporas, just literally in the fact of engaging across these languages and finding this not unexpected connection, but undocumented connection is so important to building, it's like other parts of the foundation of Atlantic studies that your work really does so well. So I love that narrative. And it's sort of, I want to follow up a little bit then on that about your research and ask, your PhD, as you said, was in ethnic studies. And now you direct the center, but you are also in a department of Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies. And so really, like, you haven't spent time in a discipline, right? You're always
Yeah.
working outside of traditional disciplines.
Well,
And
my assistant professorship was in the English department.
oh, that's right, at Michigan State.
Yeah, I that was so funny to me when I got hired by an English department. I was like, "Oh, la la, okay." Precisely
So,
because when I applied to grad school, I applied to a bunch of English departments as I was going to do literature, and my advisors told me that, like, you're not going to get into those. They don't care about what you're doing, And I was like, "You guys don't understand. I'm a literary scholar," and so they were like, "Just apply to ethnic studies and maybe some American studies complet. Just do us a favor." And they were right. But then when I went to get a job, I only got jobs in English for a minute. Yeah.
So then I'll add in, you had a stop there through a traditional discipline. And I'm interested in hearing you talk about how, like, your doctoral training and your work sort of in between disciplines or across disciplines or outside, however you want to configure it, disciplines, how that has shaped how you conceive a research project, but also even how you practice a classroom.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. Even as my little stint in English, I never was trained as an English grad student, so I actually don't know some of the things that they do, right? Which is great for me.
Teaching comp.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm in an English department. I was like, if they ever ask me to teach comp, I'm going to be just like, so how you spell that?
And no, oh no, it's so embarrassing, so embarrassing. I think like the
Don't
more you
ask Amanda,
read,
please.
no, the more you read, the more knowledge you have, like the less you have ability to spell. Like everything just becomes like just like what? I have
That
so many
too.
ideas. There's too much words in here. It all gets fuzzy. But yeah, so I think I am so my training in ethnic studies, it was in social sciences, funnily enough. And so I got very little like literary studies, even though I ended up writing like a literary book. I just had to do that on my own and like just work at it. But we didn't really have the literary side of things. But we got like our seminars were like, you know, it was so interesting, the approach. Again, this is like the distance between what they wanted and what we got, right? And what I got was great, but it wasn't what they wanted, which is like, I got taught like, this is how you do history. This is historiography. Da, 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 da. You learned that? Okay, good. This is sociology. This is how you would do sociological study. Blah, 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 blah. This is geography. Okay, this is how you would do this work in geography. Blah, 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 blah. This is like, right, anthropology. This is how you would do anthropology, and this is how you do everything in anthropology, and this is how anthropology is da, 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 blah, blah, blah. This is rhetoric. This is how you would do it like this, right? Like, so they're giving us ethnic studies, and everything that you're getting is an ethnic studies it's an ethnic studies text, and then you're also coming up with thinking about like methods and things, but you're learning it within a series of disciplines, right? So you're like, this is how each discipline would do it, right? And then this is philosophy. So this is all the continental philosophy you need to know. And then here's all the post-continental philosophy that you will be asked about. Or vice versa. You want to know all this post-continental philosophy stuff. They're going to ask you about all these MFers over here. So you better learn all these people too, right? And so that's kind of like that example in every seminar. Like, this is historical methods, and this is what they're going to do. And if you want to do it like this, you have to learn this. And so much of that training was like, you have to learn both. You have to clap back in both. You have to be able to like, take your stand 10 toes down. Like if they try to tell you about the baby in the bathwater, throw the baby out too. Like, you got to just do the whole thing, right? Like, and that was, the kind of exposing to all the ways that you could do the work, and then you choose your own adventure, right? And so for me, what became clear to me in that entire gauntlet of graduate school was that there was no one discipline that could answer a question wholly, right? And so the way that I began to visualize it was, I have a question, and I think my early question for my dissertation was a question about language, right? It was like, what is the language of decolonization in exile and in diaspora? If one cannot take the premise like of Ngugi saying that you should write in an indigenous language, how do you do it when you don't have access to that, right? Like, how do we think through that question? So that was the early question. So I said, okay, how do I answer that question? Well, I can't really just do it through linguistic studies. That gets me just to a certain place on language. I can't do it only through history because it doesn't get me to the question of language so directly. I can't really think about it through anthropology, right? Just solely through that context. But there is kind of like this literary way that I want to read, but I don't want it to just be like a close study or a close reading of the literature, because oftentimes that is like, it collapses like the work into whether it's good literature or bad literature, And I was like, I hate that, right? Like, okay, so then what's the kind of political, like anti-colonial, decolonial thread of it? And so then I just thought for a second, like, okay, I need to be able to answer this question, but I need to be able to set a sketch of what's happening, right? And then use each of these to help me address different aspects of this question, right? And in that way, doing that for the dissertation, then doing, a completely radically revised monograph like for the book really helped me. And even now for the work that I'm writing now, it's been so helpful to just approach it like, well, what tools do I need to answer this question? What are the many approaches to answering this? Without saying like, yes, cultural anthropology is the only way it's going to get answered. I know it, right? Like literary studies is the only way. Philosophy is the only way. And I'm just like, it just isn't. It just isn't. And if we were nicer to each other and we read each other more and we thought about work outside of our very like narrowly like confined disciplines, then maybe we would be able to create and produce work that attends to like a holistic way of looking at Black studies and Black people and Black life, rather than just one aspect. And I think about that not just in a disciplinary way, but also in a linguistic context, as well as a field context, because I think it holds true if we're going to say that for like African American studies in relationship to Afro-Canadian studies, in relation to like Afro-Latino studies. If we even like read each other, we're sharing the same like hemisphere, right? Like if we were to read each other and engage in that way, how powerful, right? And how much more expansive would our understandings of Blackness, Black life, and Black futures be, right? If we took into account all Black people, particularly those who are our neighbors.
I love that. Thank you. We only record audio, and I'm sad about that because when you were sort of schematizing how you think about and set out the complexities of a research project, there were multiple like finger and hand formations that actually really helped. So it was not just gestures, but you were actually the whole geography there. I was watching it, so I'm like, I really, really get it. So I hope the audio captures that perfectly.
Just imagine that you're standing in the center of a donut and every sprinkle is a little extra problem,
There you
a
go.
little discipline that wants to tell you what to do. You just going in circles, catching all the methods. Yeah.
I like that. This is the many ways of saying, being led by the question rather than the method is such an important way, I think, of talking about the contribution of Black studies.
I can't believe that you just did that so succinctly. I can't believe that. I just talked all of that yap, yap, yap because I couldn't even come up with that line. What was it? Follow the question, not the method. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down. God, please.
It was not yap, or if it was yap, it was good yap. So we should rename it Yapcast podcast because it's what we're all here for.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, though. That was fantastic. So one of the last two questions I have for you is sort of big speculative question or, big claim question. What do you think historically the field of Black studies has done well, and what do you think it has not done particularly well?
Oh my God. I mean, Black studies, I feel like an old auntie. I'm like, I'm so proud of you.
Here's $20.
So proud of you, baby. You're doing a good job, sweetheart. Keep your head up, babe. I know it's hard out there. I mean, especially now for our colleagues in Black studies in places
I'm
like
actually
Texas.
moved hearing you say that, actually.
Really?
Jokes aside, I mean, I feel that way
No.
too. It's like, hang in there.
It's real. Like, I think we've done we have, Black studies has helped to create a whole field of knowledge. It has educated so many Black people. I have seen firsthand, like teaching Intro to Black Studies at Michigan State University. My class was always full to the brim. My students were like jumping over each other to answer questions, to raise their hands, to share their stories. They would bring their friends to my office hours, their parents to my office hours. Like
Really?
Black studies is so powerful. It is a community making tool. It is a collective consciousness building platform. It is fucking life changing and life sustaining, right? I feel the very same way about Puerto Rican studies. It is, for me, I am like so honored. I am so honored to do this work. Like, I feel so lucky that I got placed in this time period to be able to learn my own history. I know how hard that was for my ancestors and my father. I'm doing that work right now in my book, and I'm realizing how painful. Like, I just uncovered a few weeks ago looking at the archive, John. I was trying to just verify something I had written about my grandmother. I'm writing about my paternal grandmother, my father's side, who my father was raised by his enslaved grandparents, right? Formerly enslaved grandparents. And I'm going through those records, and I'm seeing that my grandmother, my father's mother, she never went to school. And in the family, no one could read or write. But at some point by 1920, she had learned how to read and write, and no one else in her family had. Then she has children, 6 children, and the majority of them cannot go to school. But somehow, on the census records, it shows that all of them can read and write. And my father was one of his siblings that could go to school to the 3rd grade. And I'm like, how was it that my grandmother, my father's mother, who was born herself of people who were enslaved, who raised her children, right? Like in destitute poverty in the Great Depression in Puerto Rico, in a coastal slave municipality, right? Where they're still cutting cane and they're still cutting tobacco. Teach herself, find out how to read and write, teach her children, right? And that somehow I get to, 100 years later, lead the largest research center with the largest archive of Puerto Rican history. How is it possible
It's wild.
that I could be the
When you lay
senior
it out like that,
researcher
wow.
of this research center. Sometimes I stare and I just cry because I just can't believe it. I can't believe it, you know? And so when I say like, what has it done well? It has made so much possible for so many people. Like, I don't think that I'd be here if it wasn't for Black studies and for ethnic studies. I don't think that I could have found a place for myself in school, or even thought that college could be possible at that level, you know? So when it has not done particularly well, sometimes I like resist that kind of like easy critique, but I do think that there is a critique to be made, right?
Mm.
I think if you're not in it, then don't say shit about it. Because you don't know how hard it is. People are dying at their desks.
I love that. Thank you.
In Black studies. So number one, if you're not in it, shut up. There are way too many people that gave their lives to this. And I'll say this: when I went to Berkeley because I wanted to work with Vivi Clark. I got into ethnic studies and Black studies and ethnic studies, where she were sister departments. So I was so excited to work with her, as well with Alfred Arteaga, who was a very important Chicano poet. And I was so excited. And I showed up to Berkeley on the first day of the semester. And I went up to Baby Clark's office, and her altar was up because she had just died.
Oh, wow.
So in front of her door was a table with candles and oranges and flowers. And then the very next year, Alfred Arteaga died of a heart attack. And the very next year, Rantakaki committed suicide. Right? This is me early on coming into ethnic studies. We know from day one, right? Like this is the kind of job that will kill you if you let it. And sometimes even if you don't, right? So what it has not done particularly well is that it still finds itself in this like defensive position, right? What it has not done well is take care of its people. Because it can't, because it's a field that we're fighting for, that only exists because we do it, right? And so in that way, it's not the same as an English department or a history department that would just exist because it demands that it's supposed to exist, right? It's a field that has to be there because it's part of the Kantian university system, right? So yes. And there's also other things, like we could say things like it needs to attend more to X thing or Y thing or the intersection of X, Y, Z, which I have a lot to say. Like we need a lot more translation. We need a lot more connection. And not just to the Spanish, but also to the Dutch, like, and also to much more translation, even within places that I think have a lot of really fulfilling dialogue, which is like between Anglo and French. And to some extent, Anglo and Portuguese, like Black, studies in those fields, I feel like talk to each other in many ways. But I find very little connection between, for example, Spanish and French conversations, anybody in the Dutch conversations, right? Like, and so for me, that is one of the places that I would love to see much more movement in, and we're already seeing it. There's a beautiful translation series out of Vanderbilt that Vanessa Valdez is a series editor of. And I also know that there's a press coming out of Puerto Rico, Editora Educación Emergente, who does incredible translation work. They publish in Spanish from English and from other languages, particularly in the Caribbean. And I know that we're working so hard to create these exchanges. However, I still think that there are still pockets of Black studies who understand itself within a very like kind of narrowly understood Anglo field or North American field.
Yeah, absolutely.
And or for those who really think about themselves disciplinarily as like, this is Black studies and it can only be rooted in X kind of practice. It can only be, history, that is Black studies. Or it can only be sociology and that's what we do. Or it can only be cultural studies and that's what that is. And that is not fruitful. That is not Black studies, right? Because I think Black studies is an opening to a different kind of world, a different kind of university, a different kind of understanding of knowledges and the cross-pollination of knowledges, practices, and the breaking apart of disciplines, which are enclosures themselves, right? And so for me, when I think about that, in that kind of larger umbrella, that's what I think, the next part of our journey is, or we have to continue on this journey in Black Studies to open up the kind of enclosures that oftentimes we step into and build ourselves, right? Like, I like to be like, I am the owner, operator, mechanic, and driver of my struggle bus, right? I did it myself, right? And so it is, I think it's important to know that. But at the same time, goddamn, I'm so happy I have a bus, right? Like, I love Black studies. I love Puerto Rican studies. Like, I'm so thankful. I put my bumper sticker on, beep, beep, Boricua, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love that. That's so good. And maybe is already an answer to this last question I have for you, which is, thinking in the Black Studies context, what is the one question you would want us to all be asking, or the issue you would want us to all be thinking about?
Ooh. That is a really big question. And I don't know that there is just one. But
I don't think anybody's ever given just one. So.
Oh my gosh. That question took the wind out of me a bit. Okay. So, all right. When I'm thinking about this in like an institutional context, and when I'm thinking about, I'm going to put my hat on as like the Black woman director of Centro. I'm going to put that hat on because that has such a huge political arm. And so the amount of things that cross my desk and the amount of things that we have to think about and attend to is so immense. And I'm thinking in the context of Puerto Rico, we have a sovereignty crisis, a nation of Black people who are not counted. This ties into the upcoming 2030 census, which is going to become really important, for which we're building a campaign like 100% count, right? And this is, again, like, and I'm saying this from the position of someone, I do not do demography. I am not like a sociologist. But I have people at Center that do this work, and they let me know this is important. And these are the ways that we should think about this. That's why I really love Centro, because Centro itself, in many ways, is the fulfillment of that dream that they had, because it is kind of its own university with like a data hub and a literary hub and an arts and culture unit and a media team. And I'm like, oh, this is what they really wanted. They wanted to make a little university, But all that to say, sorry, I didn't want to be like, she don't know what she's talking about the census. I don't. My staff does though, my statisticians and my data hub and my political scientists, they do. And so we're thinking about the 2030 census. We're thinking about that in the context of the US, but also in Puerto Rico, because there's a question of data sovereignty and data access that we have, where Black people are not counted in any meaningful way in Puerto Rico, right? And these are questions that have to do with larger issues of race and racial categorization. So we have for example, femicide crisis. So we're like, what questions are the most urgent? I'm like, femicide. Intimate violence. We're at a crisis point in Puerto Rico where, like, the majority of women who are suffering from femicide and from intimate violence are Black women. The only way that that's counted is through independent sources, not through government checks or data sets. But this also has ramifications for ecology and the environment. So, like, we know that during times of hurricane season, incidences of femicide and intimate violence shoot up. Right? So we know that it's directly tied to issues of vulnerability, right? In the Caribbean, punto, right? And that we actually have to think seriously about climate change. It has such huge ramifications that also cannot be addressed without the question of sovereignty, right? Which also has so much to do with our neighbors in the Caribbean, right? And those questions are also deeply racialized, as Puerto Rico loves to imagine itself as the whitest of the Caribbean, right? Which it is not. But if the bourgeoisie elite would have their way, they would say that, right? So this is despite the fact that Puerto Rico has the first ever Black Studies program in the Caribbean running right now. that finds itself like to, it's struggling, right? Like in this university system that refuses to acknowledge that these people actually exist in this place. So you're talking about like the kind of urgent questions. When I'm thinking about like immediate life things, it like the panic that you saw in my face, it like scaled up and down and around to like all of these places, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, we are finding ourselves in these institutions that people fought for and died for, because people died for Black studies, right? People died for Puerto Rican studies to be created. Whew. And we're finding ourselves in a moment where with the stroke of a pen, some dean somewhere, some provost somehow is eradicating programs, deleting as if it never existed and never happened. So that for me, that there's an urgency there. That is a huge urgency for the future of these programs and for the kind of the preservation and the cultivation of that knowledge in the past and bringing it forward. Moreover, finally, and to the end of this, is the question of community, which is also really urgent, especially now. If community helps to create Black studies on day one, when Black studies is being dismantled, how do we call on community if we can? And if we can't, why can't we? What were we doing? What were we doing? And if we can, how do we mobilize, right, to save the parts of Black studies that we feel are important? Because again, there goes the baby and the bathwater, right? What do we want? What don't we want? We can figure that out, especially in times of crisis and urgency, which we are in now. It's the prime time to start thinking about it. It's no longer a fantasy. It's for real,
Thank you. That's an amazing place to wrap up, because I think, you said you have multiple sort of questions, multiple issues, but they really, they all revolved around this being counted, right? And what does it mean to be counted and accounted for? It opens up and folds into all these other things that you laid out really beautifully there. And, I was, of course, really excited, as I said at the beginning, to get this on the series. And this has been even better than I had hoped for, Yomaira. So I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your seriousness. I mean, you not only gave thoughtful responses, but you articulated, a concern and care and like political, ethical passion for this kind of stuff that is really important, as a, not just a perspective on the series, but, like so many people, it is about an entire investment of a person and of a history and of a memory. And all of that is gathered so much into this conversation, which is just a long way of saying thank you. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me, John. It's so lovely to talk with you always. Yeah.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.